Do not ask me what I would rate this if I had to actually think about it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Read, share, repeat, where we discuss books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy author. Me, Carrie Share. And today I am bringing you my February reading wrap-up. Now, February was a bit of a strange month for me. I started off kind of slow and then had a really strong week the week I was on vacation, after which I felt absolutely certain that I was going to hit double digits, potentially even like 12 or 13 books before the end of the month. And then I hit kind of a run of bad luck. I ended up DNFing 3 books in a row and finished out the month with a total of just 7, the vast majority of which were read on that vacation. But before we get into the books, let's just go over my stats. So as I mentioned, I completed 7 books and DNF'd 3. Of those 7 I completed, 2 books were physical, 3 were ebooks, and 2 were audiobooks. Look at me. My total pages read ended up at 3,412, and that is converting those audiobook hours into pages. Quite a bit short of that 4,000 page goal that I set at the beginning of the month. What can you do? And of those 7 books, 3 of them I got from the library. So I am maintaining that half and half library to owned ratio that I like. And of those 7, every single one of them were fantasy. Some of them did have romantic subplots, but I don't know that I would count them as romantasy, but they all very much fell within the realm of fantasy. And finally, my average star rating came out to 3.2. So diving right into the books, I started off the month with Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This was Brandon Sanderson's debut and it came out in 2006. And I read it firstly to answer the question of whether or not that debut holds up today. And secondly, I am the kind of person where when I want to read books that are in a shared universe, I always have to go back to the beginning. I do not like to go into what are more common or more popular entry points. I always go back to the beginning. So I went back, I started with Elantris. Unfortunately, it ended up not being exactly to my taste. It was pretty dated, and I kind of thought it to be pretty boring in and of itself. I ended up not being a huge fan of the main female character, even though she showed a lot of promise. And the main male character was white bread. Now, I'm not going to let that deter me from continuing to read Brandon Sanderson and The Cosmere. I know that Brandon Sanderson has said that it's not his best work, and I'm not going to begrudge him that. Most authors would say that their debut is probably not their best work. Writers, like any person who is continuing to practice a skill, get better the more they do it. So, like I said, I'm not holding it against him. I just didn't like it. I ended up giving it 2 stars. After that, I was kind of dabbling in some other books, but things really kicked off the day that I left for my trip to Kansas, which I drove to. So it was a 7-hour drive from where I live in DFW up to my dad's house in Kansas. So I used that time to do something I almost never get to do, which is listen to audiobooks. And I managed to finish out, finally, at long last, Trial of the Sun Queen by Nisha J. Tooley, which I started back in like October. And here's the thing. If you put Trial of the Sun Queen in my hands and asked me to read it physically, I probably would have DNF'd it. Or I probably wouldn't have liked it very much at all. But because I was listening to it on audio, and because I'm not really able to engage with audio in the same way I do when I'm reading a book physically, I actually ended up not minding it. This is one of those fairy romance books that followed in the wake of A Court of Thorns and Roses, follows a young woman who is plucked from a prison and forced to participate in these Sun Queen trials to find out who is going to be the next bride of the Sun King, a high fairy. And it was just sort of fine. Like I said, I probably wouldn't have liked it if I had to actually engage with the text, but because I didn't, I just thought it was fine. It was entertaining. It made the road trip go by really fast, and for that, I'm grateful. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. Do not ask me what I would rate this if I had to actually think about it. I didn't get a ton of reading done while I was actually there in Kansas. I was spending time with my dad and doing other activities. On the way back down, I did listen to an audiobook, but it ended up being too long for the trip, so I didn't end up finishing it on the trip. So I'll get to that one in just a minute. After I got back, I was just really in a reading mood, and I ended up binging several books in a row, starting with What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez and the sequel, Where the Library Hides. What the River Knows was a reread for me, and I read it back in like September or October, and I ended up really liking it, kind of to my surprise. It was purported to be a YA, something I'm not hugely a fan of, a historical, again, not hugely a fan of most of the time, but I really connected with the main character, Inez. I thought she was just so tenacious and so determined and so just like driven to solve the mystery of her parents' deaths that I just really felt for her. After I read it, I did see a couple of reviews from creators that I know and trust, and they didn't really like it. And so that made me kind of wonder if it was just one of those books that came to me at the right time. And if I reread it, I probably wouldn't like it as much. But that actually turned out to not be the case. I liked it just as much the second time. Actually, I think I liked it more the second time. I went back in last year's reading spreadsheet and I saw that I actually gave it a 3.5 the first time, but it gave me more of a 4-star feel the second time. While I wouldn't say Isabella Banez caught lightning in a bottle with this first book, I really liked it. For some reason, it just resonated with me. Unfortunately, not so with Where the Library Hides. After my reread of What the River Knows, I was really excited to get into the sequel. But unfortunately, the author reused some plot points. She executed a trope that I tend to really like really badly, in my opinion, and I didn't end up liking it. And it just kind of felt recycled from the first book. So while I do still hold What the River Knows in my heart, Where the Library Hides ended up being 2.5 stars. After that, I was able to read a book that had been on my library holds list for months, and that is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This is a YA fantasy Korean fairy / folk tale retelling, and I don't know, I just really liked it. There wasn't a lot of deep substance to it, but I don't think that was the point. I think it was supposed to be kind of light and like a fairy tale where you're not going to get too deep into the world building. You're not going to explain everything, how everything works. You're just going along for the ride. And it kind of broke up some of the heavier things I was reading. And I don't know, it was just so like, it was just such a nice palate cleanser. And I ended up giving The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea 4 stars. Did I? Yeah. And then I decided to make it a point to finish out that audiobook that I had started on the drive home from Kansas, and that was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. And yes, you did hear me say that I listened to it on audio, but the first 8 hours impressed me so much that as soon as I got home, I ordered the physical copy. I just liked it, which was kind of a surprise to me because I wasn't such a huge fan of Leigh Bardugo's writing style in Six of Crows, nor am I really a huge fan of historical fantasy. And I'm not a huge fan of like religious trauma-based stories. My religious trauma means that I avoid thinking about it at all costs. So I try not to engage with fiction that makes religious trauma a feature of the plot, which this book definitely does. That being said, none of those things mattered in this case. Now, granted, I did listen to it on audio, so everything I said about Trial of the Sun Queen still applies. Maybe if I had read it physically, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. But I don't know, I still think in this case that I would have. Unlike with Trial of the Sun Queen, when I was listening to this on the way home, I was like feeling the tension. At one point I had to stop for gas and I didn't like want to pause. I took my phone with me into the gas station to go to the bathroom and get snacks so I could continue listening. I was gripped by it. I did not want to stop reading, and it was almost a disappointment when I made it home and I still had 2 hours left. But I made it a point to actually get it finished. I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that I didn't let my first brush with Leigh Bardugo's writing color my opinion. I'm glad I used one of my Audible credits on it because I do tend to use my Audible credits on books I think I won't like as much because of everything I just said. This just worked for me. So I ended up giving The Familiar 4 stars as well. And then the last book I actually finished in February was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal. And I was kind of looking forward to this one because I've heard really good things about it. And I love Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. I wasn't so much a fan of A Tempest of Tea, which I read last year by the same author, but some reviewers I trust said that they liked We Hunt the Flame, but not Tempest of Tea. So I went into it with an open mind. The only problem I had with this book is that I didn't have enough time to enjoy it, I think. I only had a couple of days left before I had to go back to the library, and I didn't want to get back on the hold list for it, so I was like speed reading it. And I think that ended up tainting my enjoyment, particularly of the ending, because by then I only had a couple hours left and I was really just trying to get through it. So I ended up giving this one 3.5, but I think what I'm probably going to do is buy it physically and annotate it. And I suspect that I'll probably like it more. So 3.5 for now, but it could be as much as a 4 or 4.5 star once I like actually take my time with it. And that's it for the books that I finished. I'll just go through my DNFs really, really quickly. The first one was Dragonfall by R.L. Lamb. I tried reading this book last year and I wasn't really feeling it. But at the time, I thought that it was because I was slumping, but the second time around, I still didn't like it. I wasn't super in love with either of the POV characters. And I'll just say this, when you're writing a book with two different POV characters and they're both in first person, you just have to be really, really good at making those voices distinct from each other. And like, I know that one of the characters is actually like telling the story to another one of the characters in second person, but I didn't actually even get that far. They hadn't even met yet where they were, the second person POV would come into play. So they were just both in first person for me. And they just didn't feel distinct enough from each other. And I didn't really like the character voices, and the world building was very, very surface level and not really thought through. And I didn't like it. Oh, there was a third POV that was in third person. And that felt just, the choices in this book were very strange. It had some good ideas. This is a dragon romance with a dragon and then the human character being non-binary. That was really interesting, where the dragon had a binary gender, but the human didn't. That was kind of cool. Unfortunately, it just didn't work for me. And then, unfortunately, I had to follow that up with DNFing The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. And this one is probably, I should have known better than to buy it, but I found a really pretty edition. Oh, I still have it. I found this really pretty edition at the bookstore, and I had read the first chapter before and I didn't hate it at the time, even though I knew that the tropes probably weren't to my taste. I was taken in. I wish you could feel it. It's so soft. It's like that really soft, I don't know what you call it, faux, not quite leather, but anyway. I love the way this book looks. I do not like what it contains. It's an enemies to lovers, Raylo fanfiction knockoff, colonizer romance, and that's really what got me in the end. I just couldn't do it. I got to the 40% mark where the main female character was being forced into this arranged marriage with the colonizer, and knowing where this book was going to end up, I could not continue, unfortunately. And then I rounded out the month by struggling my way through the first 50% of Sailing to Sarantium by Gabrielle Kay. This is another book that's over 20 years old. It came out in the early 2000s, and not only does it have that distinct style of white man fantasy where everything in the plot seems to be contrived to make the main male character look heroic or cool or affectedly jaded, but still really desirable and badass. And that just doesn't work for me. I kind of got the same feeling reading this book as I did reading The Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell, and unfortunately I ended up DNFing for similar reasons. I DNF'd The Traitor's Blade last year because there was a sexual assault scene that was not treated as sexual assault because the victim was a man, and in Sailing to Sarantium I had to DNF it because the main male character decides to sleep with the female slave he bought the day before, right after threatening to send her downstairs to have the soldiers have their way with her just because she was crying. And yet this is supposed to be just fine. And the author made it a point to say that she was definitely willing this time, as unlike all of her other encounters before, but also he went on in detail about how young she was. And while her age is never stated, it really did feel like she was probably like 16 or 17. And nope. Not for me. So Gabrielle Kay is unfortunately joining Sebastian de Castell on that list of authors I'm probably not going to touch ever again. I know he's really prolific. I know he writes a lot of epic fantasy. I just can't do it. That is a pretty hard line for me. So unfortunately, I started off the month pretty strong. I had read 7 books by February 17th and then nothing after that, which is a bummer. but I'm looking forward to having a much better March. I'm already starting off the month with a book I'm really enjoying, and I am looking forward to sharing all that with you in the vlogs to come. And that is it for my February reading wrap up. But before you go, I've actually got some book mail that just happened to all come around the same time, so why not open it together? First, I'm going to insert a clip I took the other day of opening my Caffeine and Legends book box. Hey y'all, I have had a book box waiting for me since Friday, and I've been waiting to open it for you guys, and I just can't wait anymore. It is my monthly Caffeine and Legends book box. This is not an ad. I am not being paid to promote this, but this is by far my favorite book box. It is a reasonably priced. The editions aren't like the special ones that you would get from a Fairy Loot or a Lumicrate, but what Caffeine and Legends does is it focuses on fantasy books. So you're specifically getting a sci-fi or fantasy book. What makes this particular box special is it also comes with a coffee, tea, or drinking chocolate of your choice as its little special goodie to you. That's why it's Caffeine and Legends. I am not a coffee drinker. I'm not a tea drinker, but I do love me some hot chocolate. And that is why this box works so well, is I am not limited to just those choices. I'm on the ground and he's still coming at me. You're so needy. So like I said, I've been waiting since Friday to open this, and I can't wait anymore. Let's crack it open and see what we got this time. Don't comment on my scissors. My dog loves to chew anything that's like hard plastic. So remotes, she's chewed up a lot of our remotes, and my scissors. And we just sort of figure out ways around it. They're still good, it's just the handle. Okay, so this month's theme is Into the Void. Inside we got a letter from the author, a little bit about the box, on the back a recipe for something. This is my drinking chocolate for the month, Pure Dark. I love the Pure Dark. Then there's always a little goodie as well. It is a little rubber pouch. I don't know how I will use this. And then, of course, the main event, Grave Empire by Richard Swan. I have not read the Justice of Kings. I do own it on ebook, and I've heard it is a really great like epic fantasy trilogy. Really great things. I do know this is not quite a sequel novel, but it is set in the same universe, so I won't be able to actually read this one until I get to the first trilogy, but I've just heard lots of really great things. And of course, all the books come with a signed book plate. So I'm pretty excited to at least have this on my shelf. It just gives me more motivation to actually get the Justice of Kings read. I'm almost done. I need maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, because on the tracker thing, I finished my 50 minutes.
50? 50? Okay. So that came on Saturday, and then today I got both my Book of the Month and my Fairy Loot boxes. Obviously I know what came in my Book of the Month box, but I'm not too sure what came in this Fairy Loot box. So let's take a little gander, shall we? Divine Descent. The Scorpion and the Night Blossom by Amelie Wen Zhao. Interesting. Is this another Chinese mythology book? Because I'm pretty sure I got Immortals in my last one, so they are really trying to convince me to read more. Oh my god, I love it. Oh my god. Yeah, this is feeling very Chinese mythology inspired. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. Oh my gosh. Please tell me this is not a YA. I honestly have been looking for a book that's kind of like Daughter of the Moon Goddess. And what was the other one I read recently? I can't remember, but that really leans into that Chinese mythology of the immortals. But what I would love is for it to be like court intrigue. I don't care about like fighting monsters or like winning glory in battle or whatever. I want the court intrigue of the immortals. Court intrigue is one of my favorite tropes in fantasy. And I love the vibe of the Chinese mythology and the court of the immortals. So I just want to stay in the court and watch them like try and outwit each other. I would love that. I hope that's what this is. Let's read. The immortality trials offer a second chance in a brutal world and are open to any mortal willing to risk the journey to the immortal realm. Yay! The prize for completing them is eternal life. However, first they must survive. An Ying knows the prize can heal her dying mother and that she'll need all the help she can get if she's to complete them. But when a rival contestant, both powerful and handsome, promises protection and a chance of survival for both An Ying and her mother, she will need to find out quickly whether she can truly trust the stranger she's falling for, or if he's the most dangerous player of all, for herself and for all the realms. This has potential. This has potential. I really hope that everything I just said is true about this book. This is probably going to go up in my place of honor above my writing desk. And down comes the courting of Bristol Keats. And up goes the Scorpion and the Night Blossom. I love it. Yeah, it's so pretty. But I also want to read it. Oh, look how big that font is. It's 400 pages, but at what cost? The text is like enormous. Look at it. I am kind of excited about this one. And lastly, my book of the month box. I am not going to lie to you guys. The book of the month options the last several months have been a little bit disappointing. And that is no one's fault but my own, because I won't read anything but fantasy. And their fantasy selections are always feel like they're very light fantasy. They're like more magical realism or contemporary fantasy or romantasy, which, as we know, I don't get along with. The bookmark will go right up in here with all my others. Lovely. I picked up Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen. What made me pick this one up? I don't know. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue meets This Is How You Lose the Time War in a fantastic and epic love story. Okay, sure. Okay. Oh, they've loved each other in 1,000 lifetimes. They've killed each other in every one. I think that's actually probably what got me. And then the real star is Kingdom of Claw. And I bought this because I have the first one. And I do love a matching set. Nothing bothers me more than the fact that I have the Book of the Month edition of A River Enchanted, and I cannot get a Fire Endless in the Book of the Month edition. Endless personal torture every time I see it on my shelf. So when I saw that they were doing both, I was like, okay. I haven't read these, but I have kind of tagged this one as something I'm really interested in reading soon. And I love a good chunker. Oh yes, I love a chunker. The Kingdom of Claw, book 2 of the Ashen series. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate it. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, or consider leaving a comment down below. Let me know in the comments which one of these books you like. In my next video, I will be doing the A to Z book tag for you. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.